My name is Renee Robyn and I'm a Canadian photographer and digital artist, and I've been photographing with Elinchrom for the last 4 years. I've been collecting environments to use in digital art for the last 15 years, but I'm really excited to see what I can do on location with the FIVE. The most interesting feature for me about the FIVE is the fact that I can have these lights and I can use them in the studio, and I can also take them on location. I've always run into the issue of I have studio lights, but then going on to location, I either have to rent another set that are battery powered. But when I'm in the studio, if I have a really long shooting day, 12, 15-hour day, I don't want to have my studio lights and then my own location lights. I basically want to have everything all in one, and this unit does both quite well. For my first adventure, I wanted to bring the FIVE into the studio and see how they would hold up to my normal studio light. I wanted to bring them in and kind of really push them because I photograph a lot of dance, and I brought in Haley, who is an Indigenous dancer, and she has these incredible outfits that she sews with the ribbons and everything moves so fast. So I really wanted to challenge these lights and see how they would handle the situation. The other thing that we needed to do was control how much movement there was. So I wanted this to be kind of an exploration of movement. I wanted there to be a little bit of movement in the ribbons at the end. I mean, obviously I don't want her blurry. This type of dance is a lot faster than what I'm used to photographing. So I wanted to allow for a little bit of movement, but I wanted to make sure that she was still sharp. So in order to do that, using the high-speed sync, I can photograph at 800 of a second or 1500 of a second and catch her nice and sharp while the little tiny pieces at the end of the shawl or the jingles on the dress only catch a little bit of movement. Therefore, it just has a nice sense of life to it, I think, and I think it photographs in a really pleasing way. When Haley and I were first talking about this shoot, she showed me a bunch of really, colored gelled portraits, and I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. That's such a good idea, because she wanted to bring her culture into more of a slightly more youthful, modern experience. And so I was just like, oh my God, are we gonna cyberpunk Indigenous dance? That actually sounds kind of fun. We're experimenting with the gels, turning lights on and off, just changing the colors around depending on the outfit that she was wearing. And I'm really stoked about the results. It's definitely not in a way that I traditionally photograph dance at all, but I am completely stoked with the results. To build this lighting setup, we used 4 of the FIVEs, basically all on different power settings. And the gels that we're using are quite thick, so they allow different amounts of light out. And so in order to control that properly, we're going to adjust the power independently. So the nice thing about having a Skyport Trigger is that once the lights are set up at the right height and angle and everything else, I don't have to worry about running into her space, kind of interrupting her flow. I just get to sit back, I get to stay out of the way and make all the adjustments from afar. So when I'm shooting in the studio, one of the big things, especially with dance, is I like to shoot it with a higher aperture, because this isn't a static portrait. This isn't somebody sitting down nice and calm and I can get really good focus right on the eye. I'm also not photographing with high-end mirrorless cameras, right? I'm using older technology. And so, as a result, there's things that I want to keep in mind. Haley's moving so quickly. She has like a circle, an area that she can dance in. But if I was trying to shoot this at 1.8 or something like that, I think this would have been a lot more challenging, and also I would have lost a lot of the details in the clothing that she's sewn. So a higher aperture just kind of makes sense. On top of that, also, if I want to put a bunch of digital art in this, shooting at a high aperture kind of just makes it easier. If I'm trying to mask out tiny pieces of clothing or hair or details like that, at a higher aperture, these kind of problems kind of solve themselves. Whenever I'm working with dance, I always want to keep in mind the dancer's energy levels. I want to keep in mind how their legs are doing, are they out of breath? They do this all the time. Oftentimes they're professionals, so they're in incredible shape, but I always want to be mindful of their energy levels. So in this case with Haley, what we did was we put on a bunch of music that she normally would traditionally dance to and just kind of let her flow, because powwow dancing is very quick. It's a lot faster than a lot of the other styles of dance that I photograph. The footwork is very different, and the beats in how they move their body is vastly different from ballet or hip hop or anything else that I've been photographing. So this is a really great learning experience for me. It was a really great education in photographing a different style of dance. After we finish a sequence of dance, we basically look at these and go, okay, so if you really like this image, what movement do we do to get you into that? And then we basically just carve down those movements and get my timing as a photographer good and get her timing as a dancer. And basically, we just carve out these really great shots. The challenge that I really wanted to do with the 5 is take my studio lighting experience that I like to do indoors and take it out on location in the worst lighting ever. So we basically found a location that had these big, swooping, beautiful trees, and we set up the aerial rig underneath it. What this does is it creates an environment where I can bring the studio lights on location and I don't have to worry about trying to plug them in or like, oh my God, is my battery running out or anything like that, because we can use these USB power banks to charge the lights if we think that we're running a little bit low on power if the shoot's going long. And I know that I'm always going to be able to charge these lights while I'm shooting on location, which then that takes away a lot of the stress for me. And that allows me more brain power to think about being creative as opposed to thinking about, okay, how many shots do we have left before the day is over? On location, cables just disappear, whether it's grass or snow or leaves or whatever. And so it's always a big safety concern for me to have a lot of cables running everywhere that people can trip and they can knock over, and all of a sudden you've got broken lights, broken modifiers, and in a worst case scenario, somebody who tripped on these things could wind up getting injured. So having the least amount of cables possible on set is also a big relief for me in a safety aspect. Whenever I'm working with an experienced performer, I'm always mindful that their safety comes first. When her and I are talking about setting up the shoots and setting up our locations, it's always a back and forth of, between what she thinks is safe and what I think is aesthetically pleasing. There were other spots that we had picked out where I was looking at them and I was just like, oh yeah, but in the background, we have this building or we have these power lines, and like, yes, I can edit them out. But with this one spot, just under this one branch of trees, this looks great and we're not really going to have to worry about her concerns or mine. Audrey and I have worked together a lot, and as a result, we have a really good sense of communication between each other. We know that we can speak very frankly and very clearly. And that to me is a sign of a very successful team. So just like with Haley, we're sitting down and I know the sequence of moves that she can do, but also like, hey, let's just see you move through a couple of poses. Let's just see how we're moving with this today, how the light is, how are you feeling? Another thing to keep in mind is the costuming and the clothing that we have. So some of these are smaller 2-pieces, some of them are very long with like a lot of material and a lot of fabric. So the story that we're going to tell is not only impacted by the light and the pose, but also the material that we're putting on her body. We want to have a conversation of which stories we can tell with each outfit before she even gets onto the hoop or the silks. One thing that I always keep in mind when I'm photographing with strobes on location is to build complementary light to the ambient light. So when I'm photographing, even though she's in the shade, the background and a lot of the environment around her is still going to be in these shots. So at first, when the sun was higher in the day, I made sure that I was building kind of a more contrasty light. So I was using a bare bulb to bring out the shape of her feet on the camera left. And then on camera right, for the first part of the day, I was just using a diffused umbrella. So basically it just bounced back in and has a nice diffusion sock. So it does create kind of a softer light, but it still has those kind of more contrasty shadows. Then as the day went on and the sun got a little bit lower, the environment light around her changed. And so as a result, then I brought in a second umbrella, a white shoot-through umbrella, just to fill in those shadows. So I was shooting these almost completely at full power because the environment light was so bright. And then because we have a little bit of movement with her also, I was shooting at a very fast shutter speed, which having high-speed sync capabilities with these is extremely handy. Basically, as the day went on, I brought in a fill light, which was the shoot-through umbrella, and I had it set at about 2/3 of the power of the main light so that we still had the nice shadows, but the shadows weren't quite as contrasty. I just wanted to match the environment, the ambient light, and the strobe lighting that I was bringing in so that everything is a little bit more complementary. One thing that I used in both of these shoots is a smoke machine. The reason for that is in the studio with color gels, I really like the way the colors bounce off all the particulates in the air, and it kind of creates a softer, slightly less contrasty environment to kind of spread more of that color into the studio environment. Now with the shoot on location with Audrey, one of the reasons why I love using smoke on location is it cleans up the environment and allows for a nicer composition. With the shoot with Audrey, I still shot it with my 70-200, but instead of shooting at f11 or f8, I shot it at f2.8 because the environment behind her was really busy. If I tried photographing her with a higher aperture, then the texture of all the leaves and everything behind her would have really competed with her. So that's a big switch from what I did in the studio. So when I bring smoke into the environment, it's an additional way to create separation between her and the space itself. So it cleans up what's going on around her and creates a softer, more ethereal look. I'm kind of one of those snobby studio photographers. I don't like to leave the studio very often. I like my controlling little world that I get to create in here. But having studio quality strobes that I can take on location, that I'm not constantly stressed about the endurance of the battery, actually really opens up a lot of the world to me. They have high-speed sync, they have TTL, I can change the power and everything, all the settings from the Skyport from my camera. I can charge them with USB on location, so I'm not super stressed about, my battery or endurance. I can take them into the studio and I can plug them in. Those are all things that I'm really excited about, and that makes them an excellent addition in my equipment toolbox. I can't wait to take the 5 on different locations and incorporate it into my horse shoots, my on-location dance shoots, take them onto the coast in Newfoundland. I basically can't wait to see what the outside world has to offer right now, and that is a sentence that I never thought I would say.